today's presentation, we're excited to have Mike Stagg here to talk to us about a pretty important piece of safety equipment that maybe sometimes is overlooked. What is that, Mike?
Yeah, that's our fire extinguishers. And you make a great point is that man, we just want those things to work when we need them. And so we just walk by them a lot of times and think, "Oh, there it is." And we don't check and we don't get the training on them that we need. And so that's what we're here to talk today about is about those fire extinguishers and why they're so important and what they actually do. Um, so fire extinguishers, the purpose of a fire extinguisher is these three things: is to remove heat, is to displace or remove oxygen, and it's to stop the chemical reaction happening between the oxygen and the fuel, or the heat and the fuel, or whatever it is. Okay, you guys have probably seen this before, this fire triangle that you see. Three sides of a fire triangle are always heat, oxygen, and fuel. What a fire extinguisher does is knock out one of these sides of the fire triangle, and when you do that, fire goes out, and that's a good thing. That's what we want to have happen. So as far as the fighting a fire and things like that go, first thing we want to talk about before we talk about any of that stuff, though, about purposes and use, is safety, right? Your safety is always number one, utmost priority when it comes to fighting fires. Ask yourself these questions: if you should fight that fire, if you should flee, if you should get out of there. Okay, is the fire too big? If it's too big, get out of there. What does that mean by too big? We'll talk about that here in a minute on the size of a fire, when a fire extinguisher could be prudent to fight that fire, and whether if it's bigger than that, we got to get out of there. Okay, is the air safe to breathe? Now, if the air is safe to breathe, we could probably try and fight that fire. If it's toxic, there's too much smoke, we're coughing, we can't breathe well, yeah, we got to get out of there. Okay, is the environment too hot or too smoky? Again, if it's not safe for you, we don't want you in there. We don't want you fighting that fire. And then lastly, is there a safe evacuation path? If there is a safe evacuation path, how you can maybe try and fight that fire. Okay, there's not a safe evacuation path, man, you gotta get out there. You gotta get out as soon as possible. All right, make sure that there's somewhere safe for you to get out of that fire, because again, your safety is the priority. When you think about fighting or fleeing that fire, safety is always number one. All right, if it's safe for you to do it, you think you can do it safely, if you think there's a safe evacuation route for you to get out of there, do it. If the fire isn't too big, you can try fighting that fire. But man, if it's too big, if it's too smoky, if it's too hot, get out of there. It's not worth it. It's not worth it for you to try and fight that fire. Now, there is an OSHA standard around fire extinguishers. The OSHA standard says that training is required for employees who are authorized to use those fire extinguishers. Maybe you have those on your truck. Maybe they're in the hallway of your buildings. Whoever could be potentially required to use a fire extinguisher as part of their job, okay, or if it's written inside of your emergency action plan that this person grabs the fire extinguisher and uses it, the first person to notice the fire grabs the fire extinguisher, that could be anybody within the building. You've got to be trained on it. Okay, if it's a requirement that you might be able to use that fire extinguisher at any time, and you got to be trained on it. Okay, that is the OSHA standard. The OSHA standard says what training is required. You have to be trained on the general principles of the use of that fire extinguisher. You have to be trained on the hazards of incipient stage firefighting, right? So at the very beginning of the fire, how to fight that fire with an extinguisher, how to operate the equipment, how to operate your fire extinguisher. Okay, so those are those things that have to be trained on. Now, when does that training have to be done? The OSHA standard says that training has to be done upon initial employment. Okay, so when you're first hired, got to be trained on how to use a fire extinguisher if you're required to use one, and then it has to be done at least annually thereafter. So every single year, if you're required to use a fire extinguisher, or if you could potentially be required to use a fire extinguisher, you have to be trained on it. Okay, that is an OSHA standard. There has to be documentation taken that we have gone through fire extinguisher training, and these are the people that have done it. All right, so make sure that if you need the training on it, or if you need to train your staff on it, then we get that done here quickly so that we don't have anything that OSHA can stand on, all right? Because if they come in and they see a fire extinguisher on the wall, first thing they're going to ask is, oh, you got a fire extinguisher? Great. Have you been trained on it? And who's been trained on it? Show me that documentation. Okay. Make sure that you get trained. Make sure that that training is done on an annual basis for anybody who is required to use that fire extinguisher. All right. So there's different classes of fires. These are the different, and it's important that we know this because what's burning is going to affect what kind of fire extinguisher we can then use on that burning type of material. Okay. So Class A fires. So this is your ordinary combustibles, things like paper and cardboard and wood and things like that. Okay, your ordinary type of combustible materials. Your Class B type of fires are flammable liquids and gases. All right, your Class C is energized electrical equipment. Class D is combustible metals. And Class K are those cooking oils and greases and things you might find like in a commercial kitchen type of area. Now, this is important, again, because if we figure out what kind of class of fire that we're dealing with, what is actually burning, that's what's going to help determine what kind of fire extinguisher we can use on this. Okay, so as we talk about the fire extinguisher, all right, we've all seen them. We all know what they look like with the nozzle, the handle, the gas canister, and things like that. But what's important to us is this label. You want to make sure you look at this label because this label is going to tell you a couple of things. Number one, it's going to tell you the type of fire extinguisher that it is. Okay. For example, this one's a dry chemical fire extinguisher. It is also going to tell you what kind of fires it can be used on. Okay. It says it can be used on type B and C fires. Okay. So B and C fires, that is liquid and gas fires and the electrical fires. All right. So again, you have to make sure that you recognize the label and say, what kind of fire extinguisher can we use on this type of material that's actually burning? Because there's different kinds of extinguishers for different kinds of fires. All right, our first one that we're going to talk about is these water or air pressurized fire extinguishers. These are for use on Class A fires only. So those ordinary combustible materials, wood, paper, cardboard, that kind of stuff. Okay, these come in a large silver container. And what happens is there's water inside of these extinguishers, and what it does is it cools that surface down to remove the heat, to knock out that side of the fire triangle. It's important that we never use one of these water or air pressurized large silver container fire extinguishers on a liquid or an electrical fire. And can you think why that is? Right? If we use water on a liquid fire, what's it going to do? It's just going to spread it, right? So we spilled gasoline and it lit on fire, and we use water to try and put that out. It's just going to spread that fire. Okay. Again, with electrical fire, we have a steady stream of water being put onto an electrical fire, and we're holding on to a large metal container. Okay. With that steady stream of water on an electrical fire. Bad news, right? Okay, so make sure that we use these water or air pressurized fire extinguishers only on these Class A fires. Don't ever use them on liquid or electrical fires. Our next type of fire extinguisher is our carbon dioxide fire extinguishers. Okay, these are for use only with Class B and C fires. Okay, can't use these on combustible materials. You only use these on Class B and C fires. And how you know that you have a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher is a couple of things. Number one, it's going to tell you. It's going to say on there on that label. Number two, it's going to be a red cylinder with no pressure gauge. That's important because the next fire extinguisher we're going to look at is also a red cylinder, but it has a pressure gauge. This one does not have a pressure gauge. So carbon dioxide, red filter, no pressure gauge. What the carbon dioxide filter does, or fire extinguisher does, is it displaces the oxygen in the air so that the fire goes out. It starves that fire of oxygen, so then it goes out, okay? So if it starves the fire of air, what will it also do to the oxygen in the air that you're breathing? Yeah, it's going to starve that air too, right? So it's important that we never use a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher in a confined space without respiratory protection. Because if we're knocking out that side of the fire triangle by displacing the oxygen, okay, If we're in a confined space, we're going to displace the oxygen there too in the air. So then we're not able to breathe. So make sure you never use a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher inside of a confined space unless you have proper respiratory protection. All right. Next kind of fire extinguisher is our most popular, the one you probably have in your hallways, the one you probably have on your trucks, is your dry chemical fire. And these are the most popular because they're the most versatile. Okay, we can use these on a wide variety of fires, class A, B, and C fires. And again, this fire extinguisher, it looks almost identical to a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher. The only difference is that pressure gauge. A dry chemical fire extinguisher has a pressure gauge, and a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher does not have a pressure gauge. So that's how you can tell the difference. The containers look exactly the same. They're both red. They both have handles. They both have hoses. But if it has a pressure gauge, it's dry chemical. If it doesn't have a pressure gauge, it's carbon dioxide. All right. What the dry chemical fire extinguisher does is it separates the fuel from the oxygen. So you're putting a barrier down on top of whatever is burning and separating it from the oxygen in the air to knock out that part of the fire triangle. Helps the fire go out. Okay. All right. Our last kind of fire extinguisher we're going to cover is our dry and wet chemical fires. Okay. Those are we only use our dry and wet chemical fire extinguishers on class K fires, those kitchen fires, oils, greases, things like that. Okay. Only want to use these after the activation of the built-in hood suppression system. So all your commercial kitchens, maybe you have a senior center, a recreation center, a community center, an event center, something like that, that might have a commercial kitchen in it. And it'll have a built-in hood suppression system that would be used if grease catches on fire or something like that. You want to use this fire extinguisher only after activation of that system. Okay. And you want to make sure you only use this after electrical power to that appliance has been shut off. Okay. The material inside of these dry and wet chemical fire extinguishers are electrically charged many times. So placing an electrically charged chemical onto an electrical fire or an electrical powered appliance, okay, that's bad news again for us. So make sure that only use that after the electrical power has been shut off. Now you can see here, large silver container, right? And the other one that we saw our very first fire extinguisher was also a large silver container, but it only had water in it. So how do we tell the difference between these two? We know with the red ones, it's the pressure gauge, right? With these ones, how you tell the difference? It is going to say right smack dab on that fire extinguisher, this is only good for class K if it's a dry and wet chemical fire. It'll be large and big bold letters for you to see that this is exactly what we're going to use this fire extinguisher on. All right. So as far as using a fire extinguisher itself, what are our steps that we do to use that fire extinguisher? Number one, we sound the alarm. Okay. Pull the fire alarm, sound the siren, whatever it is that you use to activate your emergency action plan. Okay. That sets everybody into motion on what they have to do in case of a fire. Who grabs the fire extinguisher? Who does crowd control and gets people out of the building? Who ensures that we've got everybody out? That's all part of your emergency action plan. Okay. But the first thing we do to start everything in motion is we got to sound the alarm. Okay. Number two, we have to identify our evacuation path. If we're going to use a fire extinguisher, now we got to have a way to get out. Okay. We got to get out, have a way to get out of the building. Okay. If we're going to stick around for a minute and try and fight this fire to get it put out, we got to make sure that there's a safe evacuation path for us to go. Number three is make sure you select your appropriate type of extinguisher for the appropriate type of fire you're dealing with. Then you're going to discharge that fire extinguisher using what we call the PASS method, P-A-S-S. We'll talk about what that acronym stands for here in just a second. Back away from that fire once it's extinguished. Make sure you back away from the fire. Don't turn around and walk away. Okay, don't turn your back on that extinguished fire. Why is that? You want to make sure that it doesn't reignite. Okay, you want to keep watching that fire and make sure that it stays out. And then evacuate immediately if necessary. What do I mean by evacuating immediately if necessary? What I mean by that is you get one shot. You get one shot with a fire extinguisher to try and put this out. If it doesn't go out with your one-shot fire extinguisher, you got to get out. You got to evacuate. Remember, your safety is always number one. Your safety is always the priority. So make sure that you evacuate immediately if you don't get that fire out with that first shot fire extinguisher. All right, so what is that PASS technique I just talked about? PASS technique, P, pull the pin. Okay, pass is just that acronym to help us remember that we have to pull the pin. Then we have to then aim at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the handle, and then S, sweep side to side until the fire appears to be out. Okay, it's important that we do these things in this particular order. Pull the pin. Okay, that's going to break the seal and allow you to squeeze the handle. Make sure when you aim at the base of the fire. Because remember, for the most part, we're going to be using probably a dry chemical fire extinguisher. And what does that dry chemical fire extinguisher do is it places a barrier between what's burning and the oxygen in the air. So you want to make sure you aim where it's burning. Don't aim at the flames at the top of the flames. Aim at the base. Okay, aim at the base of that fire where it's burning. Squeeze the handle and sweep side to side. Don't just concentrate on one area, but sweep side to side. Okay, until that fire appears to be out. Once that fire appears to be out, again, back away. Don't turn around and let the fire maybe reignite on you. All right. And again, you get one shot. You get one shot with these fire extinguishers to make sure that they go okay. All right. It is required that we maintain our fire extinguishers as well. Because like Jason said earlier, sometimes we just walk down the hallway and we look and we think, I hope that works. Or we don't even appreciate that there's a fire extinguisher there. So we have to make sure that these things are maintained and maintained well. A monthly visual inspection is a great thing that we should do. We should inspect the bottle, the handle, the hose, and the gauge for proper working order. Make sure that there's no cracks in that hose and that it's seated correctly onto that nozzle. Make sure that the gauge isn't broken and it's still working. Pick up the extinguisher and kind of move it and shake it around. Okay, you should be able to hear the product flowing inside, and if you do, that's good. Hey, it means your fire extinguisher is still good. All the fire extinguishers are also required to have an inspection tag. All right, these have to be done, and there has to be an annual inspection done on your fire extinguishers. And it can be done by your fire department, it can be done by an outside company, but they have to come in and they have to stamp and approve that those fire extinguishers are good and ready to use. So maybe they have to recharge it, maybe they have to tell you this is a bad extinguisher, we got to get you a new one. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to put a tag on that fire extinguisher. And that tag is going to be tagged with the day, month, and year that they came out and inspected that fire extinguisher. That fire extinguisher's day, month, year tag is good for 1 year from the time that it is stamped. Okay, so maybe that's something that we want to do today. That's a good goal for us today, is to go around and check our fire extinguishers and make sure that everything is up to date. They all been tagged properly and everything is in proper order. So if we need to use it tomorrow, it's going to work for us. Okay. So that's a great thing great takeaway we can do today. Go inspect those fire extinguishers today. Check the tags and make sure that everything is within that 1 year. And if it's not, get somebody out there to come and inspect and get these things recertified if we need to. Fire extinguishers, they have limitations, and we have to appreciate what those limitations of those extinguishers are. All right, the effective distance of a fire extinguisher is only about 5 to 20 feet. So that's the distance you've got to stand within in order to be able to have that product that fire extinguisher is going to displace on the fire be able to be effective. So make sure you're between 5 and 20 feet of that fire. When you're discharging that product, it's only going to last about 20 to 25 seconds. Okay, it comes out pretty quickly. So that's the amount of time that we've got in order to make sure that we can get that fire out. Because remember, we only get one shot. Fire extinguishers are only to be used for small fires. Now, when you say small fires, okay, think about the size of a small trash can. Think of something that you would put like in your bathroom at home. Not your bathroom at work, those are big, right? But think like your bathroom at home. That small trash can that you put there, okay, that's about how big we can fight a fire with a fire extinguisher. Okay, if it's anything larger than that, shouldn't be fighting that. Call 911, get out of the building. Okay, small fires only for these fire extinguishers. Make sure, okay, that we appreciate these limitations of these extinguishers. Because remember, safety is our #1 priority. Don't think, oh, I got 2 or 3 extinguishers here. I can combine them all together. We can get this thing put out. Okay, be smart. Be smart. If it's too big, get out of there. Okay. It's important that we train and practice. Again, it's the OSHA requirement. You got to have training on this, on how to use a fire extinguisher every single year if you could potentially be required to use one. If it's specifically written in your emergency action plan that employees may have to use fire extinguishers, you got to train on them. Okay. We talked about inspection of those fire extinguishers. If you've got extinguishers that are expired or that can't be recertified or whatever it may be, keep those. Use those for practice. Okay, those are great things to use to practice with. Make sure you select the right extinguisher. Make sure you have the right extinguisher for the right type of fire. If you have a commercial kitchen, don't just have a carbon dioxide or a dry chemical fire extinguisher in that room. That ain't gonna work. Okay. Make sure you have that right class K fire extinguisher to help. Okay. And then that pass method. Remember pass. Pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze the trigger or the handle, and sweep side to side. So we can just stay safe out there with our extinguishers. They're small things, but these are things that we take for granted. So let's make sure we know how to use them and know how to use them right, and they're maintained like they should be. Okay.
Awesome, Mike. Great information there, folks. If you got any questions or comments, please type those into the chat box, and we'll ask Mike to answer those now. Aubrey posted an interesting new product that's out there. It's kind of a takeoff on an old product. It's a fire grenade.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So application. We'll see what comes of those. But
I want to train with those. Let's get
yeah,
those.
that'd be kind of fun myself.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, over the years we've had we've done a lot of facility audits and looked through different organizations. The best one that I saw was a fire extinguisher from 1989.
Oh wow.
It was still hanging on the wall and, and ready for service. So it hadn't been updated for a while. So all right, just looking there. Looks like we're getting some kudos there and
Oh,
no
cool.
questions. So what's your final word, Mike?
Make today the day that you go out and inspect those extinguishers. Let's make sure that we get that they're up to date, because you don't want a 1989 fire extinguisher hanging out in your building.
89 was a pretty good year. I like
83 was better, but 89's all right.
Yeah. Does that
I'm
mean
partial.
you were born in 83?
I'm partial.
Oh, I won't say what 89 was to me, because then I'll age myself. Anyway, folks, thanks so much for your attendance today. Appreciate all you do out there to make Utah a safer place. Go out and have a safe day.
Thanks, everyone.